Kim, hello, how are you doing?
Hi, I'm good. Thank you, Andy. How are you?
Yeah, I'm really good, thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. We are starting these films by asking our contributors just to introduce themselves and give us an overview of their work. So would you mind doing that, please?
Of course. So my name is Kimberley Sykes, and I'm a freelance theatre director, which is which is an interesting idea right now because I don't have any directing work for the rest of the year because, like so many other freelance directors, several weeks ago, theatres closed their doors, and it's very unsure as to when they'll reopen again. So I think it was Peterborough. Don't quote me on this. You said you can only call yourself a director if you're directing. And at the moment, I am not directing. And so to call myself a director is a very complicated thing right now. But when I am directing, I do quite a lot of work for the Royal Shakespeare Company. My first show for them was Dido, Queen of Carthage by Marlowe. And then I directed As You Like It by William Shakespeare for them last year. And then most recently, The Whip by Juliet Gilks Romero. And continuing my love of Shakespeare next year, it was supposed to be this year, I'll be directing Romeo and Juliet for Regent's Park Open Air Theatre.
Well, I'm pleased to hear that although some plans haven't made it, that you at least have one show that's being postponed to next year at least. And whoever it was who said that, I don't think I agree with them. I think you're a director whether you're directing or not. I certainly feel like I'm a writer, even though, I mean, I am writing right now as it happens, but I like to think I'm a writer even when I'm not writing. So yeah, I'm sorry, it's a loaded question suddenly as to who we are and what we do, given that many of us aren't doing those things anymore.
Yeah, no, in some ways I do agree in that I don't think you ever really, I think as a director, you don't really know who you are until you're in a room with actors directing. And I think you could do so much preparation and reading and research and have so many conversations, but directing is, for me, is what happens when you're in that room in front of a bunch of other artists, and you've got to bring something to life together. And how you do that, that's what makes you a director. And it changes all the time for me, who I am in that room, and every time I walk into a rehearsal room on a daily basis, I have to be present to the director I am in that moment, rather than the director I thought I was on the way into work or when I went home last night. It's a very, very, very active, present thing. So it is, I get it. I think it is really difficult to feel that as part of your identity when you're not in a room doing it.
I don't want to put you on the spot, but is there any way you might give us some examples of what you've just said about how your sense of the director you are changes from within a room? Sorry, I feel like I'm jumping on a very profound thing you're sharing with us and asking for details, but I would quite like some details and examples if we're allowed them. Like, I was lucky enough to work with you very briefly on Dido, Queen of Carthage. I don't know if either that play or As You Like It threw up particular moments where, you know, the plays or the people in the room with you, or indeed the decisions that you were making, made you feel differently about the director that you are.
Yeah. I mean, I think the day you spent with us is a very interesting example, because for me, the worst rehearsal room possible is the one where I'm the only one talking. It's and for the reason that, you know, I think I have some interesting things to say about the world, and I have some interesting views on humanity and plays and characters, but it's restricted to just my own experiences. And so to hear other people and to empower other people in a room to come and share what they think and their experiences of the world is what is really what I thrive on, and that you just can't prepare for. So even though we'd had a conversation about some of the things you might be introducing into the room when we did Dido, I didn't really know what was going to come out of it and how the room was going to respond to it, and you can't really prepare for that, and it was amazing, and what came out of it was so fruitful and surprising. And I guess, you know, when I made the journey into work that morning, I might have had, you know, I probably had an idea in my head of what you were going to do based on our conversations and what I wanted the outcome to be. But then as the director, you've got to then sit in that room and throw all those expectations away. Otherwise you can't see what is actually happening in front of you and what's happening for real, and what's live and what's surprising and what's unexpected. I guess it's the unexpected behavior of human beings that makes great drama.
Yeah.
And I consider myself very lucky that I have a job that requires of me absolute presence. If nothing else, it requires that of me. It requires hyper quality of listening and absolute presence in a way that nothing else in the world can matter in that moment. Whatever I thought on the bus on the way in, or whatever I read 4 weeks ago in preparation, none of that really matters in that moment. It's you know, if we were in a room rehearsing together, you are the most important person in the world at that moment in time, and nobody else matters.
It's really interesting listening to you, because I feel exactly the same way about teaching and my students. And there's a similar relationship there, in that a lot of people think of directing and teaching as being about power and having agency and having control over a room and an environment. But actually, the best kind of directing and teaching, I guess, is where you allow other people to show you the way, and you're there to shape and to help them do that. Maybe I mean, that's one of the things that I found incredibly inspiring and exciting about being in a rehearsal room with you, was watching you do that. And you work a room like nobody else, but you work the room without anyone feeling like that's what you're doing. And that's amazing. And I was very grateful to you that you allowed me in when I came into Dido. I also didn't know what I would get out of that session, because I was really keen to get the actors to do things and to see what they would show, not just you, but to show me as well. And I was very grateful to you for allowing that as well, to give the power of that session back to the actors and see what they would come up with. But I do feel like this language of live and surprising and unexpected probably isn't how most people would expect a director to work. And certainly I'm used to hearing about some kinds of direction which are much more about the director's vision being given to the actors in a much more directive and less empowering way. And if anything, we tend to associate the idea of live and surprising and unexpected with performance for the audience rather than in rehearsal for the director. That's really exciting. Yeah.
Well, we do it for a long time. We sometimes we rehearse for longer than we perform. And for me, a rehearsal room is the place you make mistakes. It's the place where, as a company, we fail, where we get it wrong, where we're brave enough to make fools of ourselves and to try things that might not work. And in order to do that, you've got to feel safe, and you've got to feel courageous, and I think my job as a director is to remove fear from the room, because I think fear stops people from jumping, from leaping off the cliff. And fear can come from lots of places and can manifest in lots of different ways. And it's my job to recognize that and to try and understand in each and every person I'm working with, what's making them scared. And then sometimes just through recognizing it, it disappears, or just acknowledging it or accepting the thing that's making somebody scared, it can eliminate the fear. Because to jump off the cliff is the only way to find what does work. And
in metaphorical terms. I don't want any lawyers chasing us after people watch this film and start jumping off cliffs. So I'm just saying in metaphorical terms.
In metaphorical terms, without
Sorry.
a doubt. Yeah, but like that sense of, I've never done it, literally. I'm not planning on, but you know, this I don't know, it's reminding me of the Icarus myth now. But can, like, that feeling of you know, it's an act of faith, isn't it? You could fly. I'm just thinking about Icarus and his wings. Is he gonna fall? Is he gonna fall down to earth, or is he gonna fly? Is he gonna reach the sun? And you can't really know what's gonna happen until you do it. And so I think, following on with that metaphor, my job as a director is to provide a safe landing spot if they do fall, and kind of go, it's okay, you can get back up again and make sure everyone's okay. But then if they do take off and they start to fly, then it's to encourage that, and it's to keep pushing them to go further, and then, yeah, at some point as a director, you're there, and I guess all of this is about kind of just sometimes being when to be hands-on and when to be hands-off, which is difficult to know as a director. Where are the moments where you need to get in there with the actors and in the space, and to literally start a fire. I'm jumping around metaphors here, Andy. Welcome to my rehearsal room. But once it's lit, you have to step back, because it's not the director's fire, and it's not the director's flight, I don't think, which is interesting when you're talking about vision and authorship of vision. Mm-hmm. I don't think it's mine.
Yeah.
Ultimately, it's the audience's, and I believe in an ensemble spirit, and a collective authorship.
Yes.
Purely because I want the work that I make with other theatre artists to appeal to the broadest possible audience, and not to alienate or isolate one person over another.
Yeah.
But that's hard. That's hard to do in a room.
Mm. Can you tell us how you do it? What are your 5, other than starting a fire and then jumping off a cliff, what are your 5 secrets to success?
Oh gosh, it's so hard.
I mean, a distinctive thing in your rehearsal room that I noticed is that you like everyone to be visible and able to see each other in a way which desks and tables often prevent happening in lots of rehearsal spaces. So
yeah. I don't like desks or tables very much. I do a lot of text work, but I do it with music stands rather than tables, so that we can all have the script in front of us and we all know what we're treating it with the respect and the gravitas that any piece of text requires of us. And there are absolutely moments where we're all kind of like face down with our pencils making our notes, and it's very text based. But the music stands allow you to kind of free yourself from that barrier as well very quickly. So I think in a rehearsal, any rehearsal room can sometimes start to feel a bit too heady and a bit too intellectual, or a bit too cerebral, because I think intelligence is such a vast thing and can be accessed in so many different ways. And not everybody in that room might work their best through text work and conversation, and some people will. But if it does feel like for some in that room that the text work and the conversation is getting too heavy, then that's the moment where I'll ask for all of the music stands to get put to the side of the room, and we'll get up and we'll physicalize our conversation. We'll do an exercise or an improvisation that allows us to express ourselves physically or through music or through song, because that's just as valid a way of making sense of the world and each other and the play that we're working on. And then we can bring the music stands back very easily. But anything that kind of physically cuts us off from each other, I'm not a fan of. I'm a huge fan of circles. I think circles are great. You can see each other.
Yeah.
And there's no hierarchy.
Yeah. The fact that you can read the body language of everyone in the room, even when they're sat down. I'm actually thinking this is a very un-Kimberley Sykes setup, isn't it, with a camera? I feel like I should allow more body language to be visible. But yeah, I mean, it is completely, because those moments in rehearsal, which are text-based, are usually fairly inevitable and quite hard to navigate. I mean, I also work with performers whose skill sets aren't always classical theatre and who find text just unfamiliar because it is unfamiliar to them. And those moments are really difficult to navigate, and being able to see each other's body language and not be behind desks. I think you immediately inhabit a certain kind of position the moment you do tuck yourself away. And
actors can feel that. Yes, exactly. And an actor's not going to give you their best work if they feel like you're not watching them and you're not present to what they're doing and you're not listening to them. If the actors are doing a scene and as a director you're sat behind a desk with your head in the script, not watching, an actor knows that, and it doesn't feel very generous. And generosity sparks generosity, right? And your behavior as the person in charge of that room dictates how everybody else behaves, because you are the director. You just are. It's your name, it's your title, it just is. The kind of director you are, that changes, and people will echo your behavior. So I guess in answer partly to you asking what are your secrets, how do you do it? I guess one of them is to have really, really high expectations of oneself and to hold yourself to the highest standards of behavior and respect. Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean you have to be perfect all the time, because no human being is ever completely perfect, and we all make mistakes, and being human is ugly, and we trip and we fall and we I think philosophy and a work ethic of respect, humanity, and expecting that of yourself is the only way to get other people to do it in return.
Kim, I'm sorry, we lost just a little bit of you there, but you were saying that the work ethic, do you mind repeating that bit again?
Yeah. I think the work ethic, the humanity you possess, the respect for others, they all, if you have to bring that of yourself to the room in order to expect that of another person.
Right. Yeah, thank you. That's wonderful and really helpful and exciting. Can we translate that or move on to? That's my way of saying, can we either join some dots or leave that behind, park it, and talk about something completely different, depending on whether these are dots or not. But can we turn to those two particular plays you did for the RSC, Dido and As You Like It, and think you've been telling us about the space of the rehearsal room and almost making it sound like a set. Do you mind telling us a bit about space in either of those two plays, whether that be the real spaces of the forest and the courts in As You Like It, or of Carthage and Troy and the sea in Dido? I know that space is something that's important. The way you think about space is very important to how you direct. Do you mind telling us a bit about that?
Yeah, I think space is often my way in as a director, and it's different for each and every director. But for me, instinctively, it's always been about space and how space affects behaviour and how behaviour affects space. So often, my way to begin to understand a character is to first of all understand the space that they're existing in. And it's interesting because sometimes space is literal and is geographical, and sometimes space feels more metaphoric and poetic. And it's often the writer that will tell you that, and it's my job as a director to listen to that and start to build my world in my head, and then through the actors, through the kind of psychology of space. And so, for example, with Dido, I realized that I think Marlowe uses the term shore in the play like 47 times, something like that. It's been a while. And I think he uses it only 60 odd in the whole in the whole canon, which tells us that to put it that many, to use that word that many times in one play, he's really interested in it, and we need to figure out what that is. So as soon as I recognized that, it was everything. It unlocked the whole play for me, in that the shore where most of the play takes place is the meeting place of the sea and the land. It's the meeting place of Aeneas and Dido. The shore is, it's kind of neither one nor the other. It's liminal. It's constantly moving. It's in flux, and you can't quite get your foot in it. You can't build on it. It's constantly shifting under your feet. And as soon as I started thinking that way, I could understand some of the characters' behavior, and the mess of the play, and I guess when you bring two things together, it's the meeting place where the drama happens. So I looked at a lot of Rothko paintings, and that line, that line, that area where the two colours meet, and that's where life is. That's always felt to me the most interesting part of a Rothko. It's where, you know, Aeneas and Dido, coming from their two very different worlds, they meet, and it doesn't feel like individually who they are is the drama of the play. It's who they are when they come together. It's where they meet, it's where they repel, it's where they attract. It's in the mess of that collision, the Trojans and the Carthaginians, the gods and the mortals, the future and the past colliding together. Felt like it really unlocked a lot for me. And then I guess there's also something about the effects on the characters' behavior of the spaces they're from. So Carthage being a rich land of trade, and a very diverse community, but very rooted, founded by an immigrant, founded by a refugee, a very successful land with a rich language, and very much planted and the center of the Phoenician Empire. And so immediately I knew that then, that had to be in the characters' physicality and in their way of thinking. And then I could read their text and understand why they could be so sure of themselves, why they used a certain type of rhythm of speaking, compared to the Trojans who've been at sea for I think they'd been at sea for years. I think about 7 years, was it, at the start of Dido?
Too long, anyway.
Too long, a very, very, very long time. With that sense of they've lost their home, they've seen it absolutely ransacked, and they've had all of their loved ones ripped from them, and they are being flung around in the Mediterranean Sea, and the gods are in charge, and they can't quite, they're searching desperately for somewhere to plant themselves, to root themselves, but they don't. And I don't know, I don't know if you've ever spent a decent amount of time on a boat. I have, just when I've been on holiday, and I've spent days on boats, and you go to bed at night and you feel yourself, kind of moving from side to side, because it stays with you. And so that tells us a lot. If they've been on that boat for years and years, that tells us a lot about their physicality and their use of language, and how their different spaces affected their psychological behaviors and relationships with each other.
I've had some pretty racy and exciting holidays on canal boats. Swans can be very dangerous, Kim.
I could see you, Aeneas.
Yeah, there's not much swan-based peril in Dido, Queen of Carthage, but maybe there should be.
Maybe there should. do the new adaptation.
Swan Lake and Dido, Queen of Carthage mashup. I mean, I love what you're saying in so many different ways, and that you began with the importance of the shore, and talked about this idea of this kind of constantly moving, shifting space which is in flux. And as you're reminding us, that's also an issue for all of those characters, that they're all potentially passing through, because although, as you say, Carthage is very powerful, it's also a very new, literally, I think its name does mean new city, right? And they are the first generation immigrants building this place. And so there is that sense, even a flux within Carthage. That's completely fascinating. Thank you. Kim, you've also talked to me very movingly about, in a way, we're cycling back to how you began this film, but about what you do when you no longer are the person that you think you are, because you can't be directing. Do you mind telling us a bit about that? What are you, the director, non-director, doing at the moment? That feels like an awful way of putting that question. I apologize.
No, it is a difficult question, and it's it's a difficult thing to kind of grapple with. I guess it's another example of space, a physical spatial restriction having an impact on one's psychological behavior, and isolation and lockdown, and especially someone, for me, my gosh, being around other people, being in a room with other people is everything.
Yeah.
It's the most thrilling part of my job, and so when you have that taken away from you, it could be quite scary. It feels like a bit of an identity crisis in some ways, and I think one of the things that's really helped me through so far has been through reading. And I realized that my pile of reading on my desk for, the last 5-6 years has been dictated by whichever production I'm directing, or a production I'm due to direct. And often I'll choose them as well, because they'll be based on a particular concept or context I'm interested in setting the play, but they're very much focused on the work. So I don't with no work for the rest of the year, I've had to put my reading list to one side and start another reading list, which has been slowly building up over the years, which has been reading for joy. And I haven't had very much time to do it. So it's been a brilliant opportunity to go and to look at this pile of books that's been gathering dust that I've been wanting to read, and have actually been able to devour. It's I'll tell you a little bit about the books that I've been getting my way through. So I read Circe by Madeline Miller a few years ago on a holiday, and just it absolutely ruined me. I was besotted with it. Just one of those stories, one of those books that stays with you. And it reminded me a lot of course I could see some of the parallels then, and some of the parallels with Dido, and a woman in exile, a woman banished from a land by a powerful man, who then has to make her own way through the world, and actually manages very well, thank you very much, and becomes extraordinary through enormous trauma and pain, against the odds. And then I went on to read her Song of Achilles, and I guess there was something in that about hearing the story of Troy, and in particular the story of Achilles through Patroclus's interiority. A character again who's so often overlooked, Circe overlooked, Patroclus so often overlooked. And then naturally that progression led me on to Natalie Haynes, and her brilliant 1,000 Ships, which really clearly and bravely says this is a story about the forgotten women of Troy, and how active they were in those epic tales and those stories, and they weren't just sat at home weaving, they were doing a lot actually. Which then led me on to The Children of Jocasta, which is another one of her novels, which is extraordinary, which again tells the story of Jocasta and Ismene, two female characters so often overlooked in the myths. And then which led me then on to Cullum Tobin, House of Names, which brilliant, I mean the absolute best understanding and sympathy for Clytemnestra I've ever read, as well as Electra and Orestes, and then also Ursula Le Guin's Lavinia, which I've now started, which you very kindly gifted me. You know, whoever talks about this woman, this wife who apparently has to be married is to Aeneas, when he does finally reach Italy, and then all of that has then led me on to Emily Wilson's translation of the Odyssey.
So
there's a thread.
Yeah, it feels to me like there's two threads there, right? One is the contemporary reclamation and celebration of women's lives, women's histories, and women's fictional, mythical lives. But at the same time, there's an interest too in quite a specific corner of Eastern Mediterranean culture at a particular historical moment. Do those two things matter to you together? What is that particular nexus, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing about the epic they somehow, that particular place at that particular time, it's a massive amount of time, but if they're all lumped into this general title of classics, then that something about this place and this time, and the world shifted, and something broke, and the whether that was the relationship between the gods and mortals, and belief in the gods, and the rise of man. And you know, if you follow it through to its conclusion, which we're not even at now, but you know, if we get to the founding of Rome, and that being this huge moment where man is in charge, and man, that, you know, there is no greater power than man, than king, then it feels like they begin in very kind of paganistic, spiritual, ritualistic times and societies, and end with some kind of abandonment of that. And I guess there's something about the struggle between those two things that I'm really interested in that ritual. I think ritual helps us understand who we are, and I think it connects us. I think feeling connected to what's come before us can be very, very rewarding. It makes me feel very peaceful. Makes me feel very hopeful. I like to feel connected to the past and to things that have come before us.
Yeah.
And I love ritual. I love recognizing ritual in daily life. And even though we don't worship the gods in the same way anymore, to eat together, to sing together, to get in a room with a bunch of actors and tell a story together, and then to put that in front of a room of people who have all come together to learn something about the human condition. And the ritual of that hasn't changed. I mean, it's changed. It's gone through different phases. It's morphed through time, but essentially we still get together and do the same thing, and get married and die and have funerals, and that feels so important to me for some reason.
Yeah, it is important. I don't think we need to search for reasons for that. I second everything that that you're saying, and I guess we're living through a really exciting moment where, both fictionally but also in terms of historical research, we're thinking about exactly the kinds of people whose narratives haven't been heard, and who were part of those rituals but have been left out of the way we remember and give access to those rituals. So I think it's enormously exciting. And I know you're feeling at the moment like you're not quite sure who you are and where you're at, but I wonder what this reading you're doing now, this off-duty reading, I wonder what it will do. I mean, it sounds heavily embedded in previous work that you've done, but it will also impact and change perhaps the work that you do going forward, and that'd be really exciting. It will help you create your own new rituals amongst people once you are allowed to be amongst people once again.
Yes. Oh gosh. I hope so. It's, I guess you as a freelance theatre director, you're often, hopefully you're always directing something that you feel connected with, and if you don't feel connected with it, then you shouldn't direct it. Just because you're offered a job doesn't mean you should take it if you don't feel like you're the right person. And so when you look back over as a director at all of your work, when you put it together where you've got so far in your career or life, it feels like right now in isolation is a really good moment to just take stock, and to look at that and see some of the threads that continue throughout. And actually, I think what's been most useful has been to go even further back than when I started directing, and to be thinking back to childhood and stories I enjoyed as a child, and memories of times and activities, and lots of things I I remember as a child that I can connect to what I'm doing right now as well. And in that way, you know, I haven't talked properly about the Forest of Arden yet, but I guess it's a useful point to bring it in that the Forest of Arden is a scary place. The Forest of Arden is a dangerous place.
So just to explain to listeners, this is As You Like It you're talking about now, right? Sorry.
Yeah, no, good. The Forest of Arden in As You Like It. So the play begins in the world of the court, and the court feels quite restrictive, and there's kind of a new world order there, and the previous duke has been usurped, so they've got an unelected leader who's sacking anybody who doesn't agree with him or banishing them, which is something that I think we can identify with a little bit right now. It's a place where of kind of conforming to society, and anybody who thinks differently or speaks differently or even tells a joke is punished for doing so. And so a bunch of the characters in the play end up either being banished to the Forest of Arden or going themselves through voluntary exile into the Forest of Arden. And they go on a transformation in this forest, and they change identities, and they change genders, and it's about exploring who they are without necessarily knowing what the answer is going to be, because there's something about that space and opening up and being, I guess there's something about the Forest of Arden that feels like you can't really go anywhere else, right? So you're kind of you're stuck in this forest and you can't get out, and if you do leave, you're going to die, because the Duke's going to have you. So what do? You learn about yourself. You explore your identity. You
write bad poetry.
Write terrible poetry. You can go, okay, yeah, exactly. Which is happening right now. We know it. And we know that not every play to come out of lockdown is going to be necessarily very good. But it's not that, it's the act, it's the courage, it's the bravery to say, do you know what, I've got nothing else to do, I've always wanted to write some poetry, and that feels like right now.
Yeah.
And that feels, I feel like even though I'm in a kind of physical lockdown, my Arden is psychological. My Arden is a state of mind, which I always thought it was when I was directing the play. We didn't have a single tree on stage because it actually had nothing to do with a geographical forest that is possibly in England, but maybe in France. But I don't think any forest in either England or France has ever had a wild lion in it. So immediately you kind of go, Shakespeare's not talking about a literal space. He's talking about a metaphor. He's talking about a state of mind, which is why in my production, the audience were the trees. And in the court, they were not visible. And there was a physical wall, literally. I mean, we did it through lighting between us and them. And then when we got into the forest, we just allowed the audience to be seen. And we just said, look, we're all in a room together. Let's play. Let's explore. And if you want to be a tree, go and be a tree. It's often the part that the first ever role most of us ever played in a school play was the tree, right? So yeah, that feels a lot like right now.
Yeah. Kim, I feel like you're telling us all to develop a foresty state of mind, which I think is excellent advice. And given that we're both, and so many of us are worrying about the theatre industry at the moment, I definitely take comfort from thinking that theatre in England started out, during times of plague, and actually had closure because of plague built into its economic plan. In that those early playhouses, they knew they'd have to shut for months or even years on end. So I take comfort from the fact that previous theatre companies have figured out how to keep going during times of plague, and I'm delighted that the sector has you in it to show it how this might work going forwards. I'm just throwing that in as a bit of optimism at the end. That's my foresty state of mind.
I like it. It's this again. It's about looking back in history. It's about, you know, I'm not surprised I'm looking back to the classics and to mythology, to the Greeks and the Romans right now, because they teach us, they show us, look, they go through these massive wars, they go through these most epic human traumas and journeys,
yeah.
and tragedies, and they come out of it. So yeah, it's I'm not really interested in reading anything domestic in a small room right now, because I think I've got enough of that going on.
Yeah.
I think it's important that we, for me, and if it works for anybody else, to this is the time to really read those big epic tales, and that's how we get the Forest of Arden. That's how we access that state of mind that Shakespeare's asking us to dare to go to with him.
I love it. We're ending these films, Kim, just by asking people what the word literature means to them, and I sort of feel like you've been answering that question in the second half of this conversation. But is there anything else you'd like to say about what literature means or where it sits for you?
It's interesting. When you ask me that question, I immediately put a distinction in place between literature and theatre. For some reason, they feel like two very different experiences. So I guess for me, my life, my work exists on the shore between those two things. My job is to take literature and make it physical and make it real, and to tell a story on stage with it.
Yeah.
And if one's the land and one's the sea, then I guess I'm really happy being that liminal, moving, shifting shore in between literature, which feels like the written word for me, which feels like what's on the page, and is is deeply personal. And then how you take, I guess literature to me is deeply personal, and theatre is more universal, but I don't think you could be universal without being personal. So yeah, I see myself smack bang in the middle of those two things.
I love it. I love the idea of being universal by being personal. That's fantastic. Kim, it's been such a fabulous conversation, and I've learned so very much. Thank you.
Thank you. I felt like a director today.
Yes, that makes me very happy. Take care.
Thank you.